screen could have been anything, given what they'd been looking for. He knew it could only be one thing. How big, he asked. Well, Yamada manipulated controls and frowned thoughtfully. I figure they're shielded, sir. I sure can't get a good read on the user end, but the feeder beam seems to be peaking at about 200 kilowatts. He looked up and met the ensign's eyes expressionlessly. That's a lot of juice for a bunch of stilties. It is indeed, hero, Tremaine murmured. It is indeed. He shook himself. What's the location? 63 clicks west-southwest of the Muddy Wash Valley, sir, Yamada replied. He tapped another light blotch, smaller but much brighter. That's their direct feed station, but it must be a relay. It's on the side of a ridge, well below its crest, and I don't see any uplink. Uh-huh. Tremaine watched the display for a few more seconds while the pinnace's low orbit sweep took it towards the horizon. Then he nodded and clapped the sensor deck on the shoulder. Good job, hero. I'll make sure the skipper knows who spotted it. Thanks, sir, Yamada grinned, and Tremaine turned to his NPA comm officer. Punch up the ship, Chris. I think the old lady will want to know about this. It looks like you were right, Honor. Dame Estelle Matsuko's face was distinctly unhappy on the comm screen. There's something there anyway, and whatever it is, it certainly isn't legal. The entire Mossy-back range is off limits, and so is the Mossy-back Plateau. It doesn't necessarily follow that it's a drug lab, Otter pointed out, and Dame Estelle snorted. Of course it doesn't, and if you can say that 3 times in a row with a straight face, I'll buy you a 5-course dinner at Cosmos's. Otter chuckled at the reference to Landing's most expensive and exclusive restaurant, but then she sobered. You're right, of course, she admitted, but even if it isn't the lab, even if it isn't the lab, it's still illegal. The question, I suppose, is what you want to do about it, ma'am. What do you think I want to do about it? Dame Estelle's expression was grim. Barney is putting together a raiding party right now. Do you need any additional manpower? I could lend some of Captain Papadopoulos' Marines. I expect we've got all the troops we need, but thanks. I'll check with Barney. If he thinks he needs some help, I'll certainly let you know, Dame Estelle said gratefully. Major Barney's variant Medusan Native Protection Agency slithered forward through waist-high knobs of shemog moss and tried to ignore the chemical stench of its sap. His mottled fatigues and body armor weren't as good as the Corps' reactive camouflage, but they blended well with the monotonous background. The hugely outsized insects that served Medusa as birds swooped and darted above the moss, and he made himself move even more slowly to avoid startling them. Unlikely though anyone was to be looking this way and notice a sudden eruption of bugs from the moss, it was still possible, and he had no intention of blowing this operation now. He reached the crest of the rise and paused to catch his breath as Sergeant Danforth eased up beside him. Like his variant, Danforth was an ex-Marine, and he unlimbered his massive plasma rifle with reassuring confidence. Alloy and plastic clicked as he mounted the 150-centimeter weapon on his bipod, inserted the heavy power pack, and snapped the electronic sight into place. He hit the self-touch switch with his thumb, then nodded and burrowed the stock into his shoulder, peering through the sight at the buildings below. His variant checked his own sidearm, then raised his electronic binoculars to survey the same scene, and his lips burst in grudging admiration. No wonder the aerial shots hadn't shown anything. The Corps itself couldn't have done a better job of concealing the place. The structures were clearly off-world in origin, sturdy prefabs that might have come from any planet, but they were buried almost to the eaves, and their roofs had been covered in sod. Rolling knobs of shemog grew across them, completely breaking up their outlines, and he was willing to bet there was a hefty layer of insulation under each of those roofs to prevent any betraying heat signature. That would only make sense, particularly with the volcanic springs 2 clicks east of them. Waste heat could be ducted to them and then lost forever in their natural cover. He swallowed a sour curse as he reflected on the fact that the whole damn base had been built right under the NPA's nose. Admittedly, their hands had been full with other matters, but this was more than any single night's work. His people had every opportunity to spot it going in, and they hadn't. Well, they were about to make up for that, he reflected with a certain grim satisfaction. He lowered his glasses and keyed his comp twice without speaking, then waited. No one answered with the matching double click that would have indicated a perimeter team not yet in position, and he raised his glasses once more. Not a sign of life, he mused, just the silent, moss-covered roofs and walls that showed more confidence or stupidity than he would have allowed himself. There should have at least been one lookout, however good they thought their camouflage was, but his variant wasn't the sort to look a gift horse in the mouth. If his opponents chose to give him the advantage of complete surprise, he certainly wasn't going to object. He raised his wrist gun to his mouth, never letting his eyes waver from the scene before him. "Go," he said quietly. An idling turbine screamed to life 50 kilometers to the south. 6 armed NPA skimmers arose on their countergraph, pointed their noses north, and leapt ahead at full power. His variant held his glasses steady as the mounting roar of turbines swept up from behind him. It was faint at first, little louder than the distant wind, but it grew by leaps and bounds as the skimmers roared forward at over 900 kilometers per hour. They exploded over his variant's perch in a wave of man-made thunder, battering him with turbine wash, and made one screaming pass above the outlaw base. 2 of them killed velocity with savage power, going into a perfect hover directly above the buildings, and the other 4 peeled out to the sides, spreading to encircle the base before they grounded and pumped their hatches. Armed NPA cops poured out of them, 8 from each grounded skimmer, and moved rapidly forward under cover of their transport's dorsal turrets, spreading out as they went. They advanced warily, half crouched, weapons at the ready, but still there was absolutely no response from the structures, and its variant frowned. Half buried or not, the occupants of that building would have had to have been stone deaf to miss that thunderous arrival. Surely at least one of them should have poked his head out to see what was going on. He was raising his comm once more to order his strike commander to hold his position when something cracked viciously from his left. He wheeled towards it as a terrible gurgling scream sounded over the comm, and a second flat, sharp explosion echoed over the rolling terrain. He saw a spurt of smoke this time, great white smoke surging up out of the moss, and then the echoes of the 2 explosions were drowned in the rippling whine of pulsar rifles on full auto. Bright, spiteful flashes of white fire blossomed as the pulse darts shredded the moss about the burst of smoke like some crazed threshing machine, and his variant shook himself out of his momentary paralysis. "Check fire," he barked. "Check fire, damn it!" The pulse rifles fell silent in near instant response, and he darted a glance back at the base. Still no sign of life, and his strike party, frozen as the crackle of combat erupted behind them, began to move forward once more as it ended. They moved more quickly now, rushing to close with the buildings before anyone else got any ideas about opening fire, and he turned back to the flank. The stinking smoke of the burning Shemak floated on the wind, rising from the moss the darts had torn to ruin, and he coughed. "This is Leader 1, he barked into the comm. "What the hell happened over there, flank 2? "Leader 1, this is flank 3, a voice replied. It was flat and tight, over-controlled, and it wasn't flank 2. "Matt's dead, Barney. Don't know what it was, some kind of projectile weapon, but not a pulsar. Blew a hole the size of my fist through him, but it didn't explode." "Oh shit," his variant groaned. "Not Matt Howard. He'd been due to retire in 2 more years. "Okay, flank 3, he said after a moment. "Make a sweep of the area and find out what the fuck happened. And be careful, we don't want any more The terrible end of the world concussion blew him flat on his back as the entire base erupted in a red and white fireball of chemical explosives. "Holy mother of..." Ensign Tremaine swallowed the rest of the phrase as a towering plume of smoke and dust spread up from the base. An entire NPA skimmer cartwheeled away from it almost lazily, bouncing end over end across the ground for 50 meters before it disintegrated in a fireball all its own. One of the hovering skimmers vanished, plunging straight down into the inferno as some flying projectile smashed its countergraft foils and lost lift. A fresh explosion roared up out of the quick chaos, and the last of the 6 skimmers staggered drunkenly across the sky. It careened downward, barely under control, and its port engine ripped away as it hit. The pilot lost it, dead, unconscious, or simply overpowered by the uneven thrust that spun his crippled mount in a wreckage-shredding ground loop over the rough terrain, but at least it neither exploded nor caught fire. "There, Skipper," Hiro Yamada snapped. 065. Tremaine ripped his gaze from the deadly chaos below him, and an ugly glint and an ugly light blazed in his normally mild eyes as he saw the sleek, high-speed aircraft darting out of its camouflage. It rocketed forward, accelerating madly as it streaked away, using a knife-edged ridge of rock for cover against its very unstunned perimeter force. "Ruth, give me a pursuit vector on that son of a bitch," Tremaine snarled, and the heavy pinnace dropped like a homesick rock as Kleinmuller chopped her countergraft back to 0. She did more than that. She dropped the nose almost perpendicular to the ground, lined it up on a fleeing air car, and gave her air-breathing turbines full throttle. The pinnace shrieked and bellowed down the sky, and Tremaine hit the arming button. He'd never fired a weapon at another human being in his life, but there was no hesitation in him as the targeting screen flashed to life, nor did he even consider calling upon the air car to halt. He was no policeman or court of law, and its sudden flight on the heels of the explosion was all the proof of murder he needed. His lips drew back over his teeth as the target Piper moved steadily towards it, and his finger caressed the trigger grip. The fleeing air car's pilot probably never even realized the pinnace was there, not that it mattered one way or the other. His craft had the speed to outdistance anything the NPA had, but no pure air breather could run away from a fleet pinnace. The Piper merged with the air car. A tone sounded. Tremaine's hand squeezed, and the 2-centimeter laser ripped its target into very, very tiny pieces and scattered them across the endless moss like tears of fire. Dame Estelle was deathly pale in the briefing room comm screen, and Honor knew her face showed her own shock. The triumph of finding the lab at last had turned to dust and ashes on her tongue as the commissioner recited the casualty figures. She should have insisted on using Papadopoulos' Marines, she thought wretchedly. At least they'd have been in battle armor. But she hadn't. 55 dead and 6 wounded. Over 90% of the strike team had been killed. Every one of the survivors was injured, 2 critically, and one of the perimeter team was dead as well. 61 men and women wiped away or hospitalized in the space of 2 minutes. It was a staggering blow to the small, tight-knit NPA, and she felt physically ill over the role she had played, all unknowingly, in creating that slaughter. Dame Estelle, she said finally. "I'm sorry. It never occurred to me that it's not your fault, Honor," Mitsuka said wearily. "Nor is it Barney's variance, though I think it's going to be a long time before he accepts that. There had to have been a leak at our end. They must have known we were coming." Honor nodded silently. The trap his variant's strike team had walked straight into had been deliberately designed to kill as many of them as possible. The druggers had evacuated well before the raiders arrived, but they could have blown their base anytime they wanted to. They'd waited until the ground team was right on top of it, and that made it cold-blooded, deliberate murder. At least Ensign Tremaine nailed the ones who set it off, Dame Estelle went on. "That's something. I'd have liked to have prisoners, but don't you dare tell him that. He did exactly what I would have done." "Yes, ma'am," Honor managed with a wan smile. "I'll tell him you said that, not chew him out for a perfectly normal combat response." "Good." Dame Estelle scrubbed her face with her hand, with the heels of her hands, and straightened her shoulders with a visible effort. "Actually, I'm afraid what happened to Matt and Howard worries me even more than what happened to the strike team," she said, and Honor blinked in astonishment. The commissioner's mouth twisted at her expression, and she rose from behind her desk, turning the comm terminal to direct its pickup at her coffee table. A strange weapon lay on it, looking very like some crude version of a pulse rifle, except that it had neither a magazine nor a proper stock. Instead of a vertical buttstock, it ended in a flat horizontal arc of carved metal perpendicular to the line of the barrel. "See this?" Dame Estelle's voice asked from beyond the pickup's range. "Yes, ma'am. What is it?" "This is what killed Matt, Honor. My people tell me it's a single-shot, breech-loaded flintlock rifle, one built for a Medusan." "What?" Astonishment started the response out of Honor before she could stop it, and Dame Estelle's hands appeared on her screen as the commissioner lifted the clumsy-looking weapon. "That was my response," she said grimly. "This," she touched the curved metal arm, "is the butt plate. It's made of metal because there's no decent wood on the planet, and it's shaped like this because Medusans don't really have shoulders. It's designed to go across the fighter's chest to absorb the recoil, but that's not the most interesting part of it. Look." She turned the weapon on its side and gripped the small knob on the trigger guard, then cranked the entire guard to a half turn. A plug of metal dropped vertically out of the barrel, and the commissioner lifted it to show the open breech to the pickup. It's a very ancient form of breech closure for nitro-powered weapons, though I understand it usually operates in line with the barrel, not vertically. Dame Estelle's voice was almost distant, a dry, lecturer's voice like a buttress against her own shock. "It's called an interrupted screw," she went on. "Basically, it's nothing more than a long, coarse-threaded screw with the threads cut away on two sides, so it only takes a half turn to engage or disengage it. One of my contacts is an antiques weapon buff, and she tells me it's the only practical way to achieve a gas-proof breech seal on a weapon that uses loose-loaded propellant. They shove a hollow-based projectile, a soft-legged, about 18 millimeters in diameter in here, put the powder behind it, and close the breech." Her hands demonstrated on the screen, and she turned the weapon on its side. "Then they pull back this hammer, which opens this little pan, and they put more loose power into it. When they pull the trigger, the S-shaped hammer snapped forward, striking a lump of flint in its jaws against the roughened inner surface of the panlet, and a brilliant spark flashed. Dame Estelle dumped the weapon back onto the table and returned to her desk, swinging her terminal until she looked out of it at Honor once more, and her face was grim. "A Medusan could reload this a lot more quickly than we could," she went on. "If he puts the butt directly over one of his arms, he could actually reload and reprime it with that arm without even lowering it from the firing position with the other two. And it's a lot longer ranged and more accurate than you might think. The barrel is rifled, and the explosion of the powder, old-fashioned black powder, not even nitrocellulose, they tell me, spreads the hollow base of the projectile, forcing it into the rifling and spin stabilizing it. It's no pulse rifle, Honor, but according to my weapons buff's best guesstimate, this thing is probably accurate to 200 or even 300 meters, and we have no idea how many of them are out there." "Dear God," Honor murmured, her mind racing as she envisioned thousands of Medusans armed with those primitive but deadly weapons. "Exactly," the commissioner said harshly. "It's crude, very crude, but that's because someone took considerable pains to make it look that way. The actual manufacture is quite good, and given the current Medusan level of technology, it's an ideal weapon for them. Simple, sturdy, and within their own manufacturing capabilities, even if only barely. But there's no way, this many sudden advances could occur naturally in one lump. My comtech tells me it took centuries for old Earth to advance from crude, fuse-fired smoothbores to anything remotely like this. In fact, she insists no one on old Earth ever produced one that incorporated all these features, except for something called a Ferguson rifle or something like that, and that one never went into mass production. So at least the design had to come from somewhere off-world." Honor's voice was equally harsh, and Dame Estelle nodded. "My own opinion precisely. Some greedy idiot has jumped the Medusan's ability to kill one another, or us, by something like 1,500 years." The resident commissioner looked strained and old, and her hand trembled slightly as she brushed her hair back from her forehead. "He's brought this abortion in through my security, and he's turned it over to the nomads in the outback, not even to the Delta city-states. Even if we nail him, there's no way to put this genie back into the bottle if he's taught the Medusans how to build the things. In fact, they're bound to figure out how to make heavy heavier weapons, real, honest-to-God artillery. So unless we want to take over the role of guaranteeing the Delta's security with off-world weaponry, we're going to have to encourage the city-states to learn how to make the goddamn things just so they can defend themselves. And worst of all, our forensic people think the Medusans who killed Matt were hopped to the breathing slits on Makoa, the same off-world Makoa we've been seeing clear on the other side of Mossybacks. But why? Honor asked slowly. I don't know, Dame Estelle sighed. I just don't know. I can't think of a single commodity on this planet that could possibly be worth this kind of investment, Honor. Not one. And that, she finished softly, scares me a lot worse than if I could. The quiet hum of the buzzer scares me a lot worse than if I could. The quiet hum of the buzzer turned rock-shoes when no one answered, and Andreas Venizelos jerked up out of his sleep with a muffled curse as it broke into a series of abrupt, jagged bursts of sound, guaranteed to wake the dead. The lieutenant dragged himself to his feet, rubbing sleep from his eyes while he stumbled across the darkened cabin. He hopped on one foot, yelping as a bare toe collided painfully with some invisible obstacle, then half fell into the chair before the comm terminal. The buzzer was still screaming at him, and he glared at the chrono. 02:15. It had been less than 3 hours. This, he told himself savagely, had better be damned important. He raked a hand through sleep-tousled hair and punched the audio key with his thumb, refusing visual contact in his disheveled steak. Yes, he didn't quite startle the world. Andy, the blank screen said, "This is Mike Reno." Captain Reno. Venizelos straightened in his chair, rags of drowsiness fleeing, and frowned. "Sorry to disturb you," Reno continued quietly. "I know you just got in a few hours ago, but we've had some traffic up here I think you should know about." The ACS commander sounded anxious, possibly even a little frightened, and Venizelos' frown deepened. "What sort of traffic, Captain?" he asked. "A Crown courier boat came in from Manticore about an hour ago and headed in system," Reno replied. "It didn't stop for inspection, of course." Venizelos nodded. Crown courier boats had absolute precedence and complete freedom of passage anywhere in Manticore in space. But I just got a look of the passenger manifest. Something about the way he said it touched Venizelos with dread, but he bit his lip and waited in silence. "It's Klaus Hoffman, Andy," Reno said softly. "I don't know what he's doing on a Crown courier, but he's here, and he's headed for Medusa. After what happened with the Mondragon, I thought, well..." His voice trailed off, and Venizelos nodded again to the unseen pickup. "I understand, Captain Reno, and I appreciate it." He rubbed his eyes for a moment, then inhaled deeply. "It'll take me a few minutes to get dressed, sir. Could you warn the comm center I'm on my way up and ask for a scrambled channel to Fearless?" "Of course, Andy." The relief in Reno's voice was manifest, and he cut the circuit. Venizelos sat motionless, staring at the silent terminal for long, slow seconds, and his mind raced. Civilians, no matter how important, had no official business on Crown courier boats. But Klaus Hoffman wasn't just any civilian. It would have been very difficult to refuse him passage. In fact, Venizelos doubted anyone had dared tell Hoffman no about anything for decades. Yet how he'd gotten here mattered far less than why, and Venizelos could think of only one possible reason for him to come, especially in secret aboard an official government vessel rather than openly aboard a civilian transport. He rose and reached for his uniform trousers.